I bet you can't hear me. Maybe you can hear me now. Hello, welcome. Happy Wednesday. Let's see. It's working. Okay. Technology is our friend, I always say. And there was some glitches this morning, but I got us going. It's actually afternoon here. I'm still in Scotland and happy to be joining you today. And Steve Yulberg, who is usually with you on Wednesdays, is still recovering from his knee surgery. But he's doing well and will be back in a couple of weeks. So, um, I thought we could chat a bit today about diatonic chords and minor keys. So, if you were here for the Wednesday live stream last week, I talked about things that I am practicing as a result of having attended several of the open sessions here in Scotland and kind of learning about Scottish music and Scottish jam session styles. And so this is a kind of a continuation, but in a different direction. So I talked a lot about playing melodies in different keys, but still in my sort of home base position. But I also was thinking a lot, I have been thinking a lot about the chord side of playing. And I want to just kind of go into a little bit of music theory and a lot of kind of application and think about diatonic chords and how they also relate to minor keys, because this is an area of my music theory that's been there, but a little bit fuzzy. It's kind of, I always tell my students when it comes to minor keys, there's no rules. But that's not exactly true. There are some strategies and things that help us, but minor keys get a little bit more murky. So I'm going to talk about what I've been observing in terms of chords in minor keys and also the accompaniment and chord strategies here, rather than being like a set chord progression that is played the same way every time through, is more that the chord player gets to and actually should play different chords different times through the tune, which creates tension and release, and the melody stays relatively the same, and the chords are what kind of dance around the melody and create different feelings. And so I'm going to show you an exercise that I've used to kind of help me think about and begin to learn what it might feel like to put different than expected chords into a piece of music. So, are you ready? Let's try. I do have it pulled up where I can see your comments on Facebook. So if you are following along and you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat on Facebook, and I will be following along with that. And even if you're watching it when it's not live, you're welcome to drop your questions in the chat, and I should be able to answer them later on. So cool, do that. All right, let me show you. I've got my diatonic dulcimer in my lap tuned to D-A-D. And let me get rid of these words. There we go. So when we are playing in a major key, our diatonic chords are major 1, 4, and 5 chords. So if we're playing in the key of D, we can expect to play D major, G major, and A major chords. And then there are also 3 minor chords. They're the 2, 3, and 6 minor. I like Steve's representation of the 1, 4, and 5 being the I love you sign language. So 1 is your major chord, 2 and 3 are minor chords because those fingers are pointed down. 4 and 5 are major chords, and then 6 is the other one that we use a lot, and that's a minor chord. So 1, 4, and 5 are the D, F, G, and A. And so E minor, F sharp minor, and B minor are the other minor chords. So a B minor, an E minor, and an F sharp minor are expected chords in the key of D. If I take that same information and I move it to the key of G, for example, G is my 1 chord, and then A and B will be minor chords, so A minor and B minor. C will be my 4 chord, and D will be my 5 chord. So I'll have G and C and D major chords. So I can play a G chord here, but my C is going to be up higher because I need my 6th fret to make a C chord. If you have a 1.5 fret, you have an option for playing one with a 1.5 fret down low. But if not, if your dulcimer looks like mine, then you need the C chord up here. And if you're playing a hammer dulcimer, you will just move into the G box probably to find these chords. Find your C, E, and G notes to make a C chord. So I have a G chord, a C chord, and a D chord. I know my D chord. And then I also have an A minor and a B minor and an E minor. 6 is the E minor. So you can see where I'm going in terms of it's important and helpful to know the names of the chords up and down the fretboard so that you can find more than just D and G and A chords along the way. You'll also need to know some of these other minor chords. So in the sessions here, as well as most sessions that I've gone to, jams back home, the keys of D and G and A are the most common major keys for playing melodies. So in D, I need D and G and A, and also E minor and F sharp minor and B minor. In G, I need G and C and D, and also A minor and B minor and E minor. Shoo, that's a lot of letters in a row, isn't it? And in A, my 1, 4, and 5 chords, that is the major ones, will be A and D and E. So I have these major chords, and then in the key of A, my minor chords are B minor, C sharp minor, and F sharp minor. So those chords all exist on the diatonic mountain dulcimer with a 6.5 fret. So if you have 6 and 6.5, you've got every single chord that I just named, which is pretty cool. So you can play diatonic chords, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6s in the keys of D and G and A. So what do you do when a song is in a minor key? I always historically said you just have to learn each tune and figure out what chords are in the tune. So if you want to play Wayfaring Stranger in the key of E minor, you just got to learn what chords are in it. If you want to play Cold Frosty Morning in the key of A minor, you just have to learn what chords are in it. If you want to play The Road to Listen Varna, E minor, you just have to learn what chords are in it. So that's great if you have time to learn the songs in minor keys in advance. I've been going to these sessions where they don't give you any information in advance. And in fact, I don't even know the names of a lot of the tunes because in a noisy pub in the middle of a session, usually don't understand the title of the tune across the room, right? So all I get is it's in the key of whatever, and then they take off and they're playing it, and I am trying to find my way. So they were playing a lot of tunes in the key of A minor at the first session I went to. And I was confident that there would be A minor chords in the key of A minor. And that was about all that I was confident of. So I found myself really trying to figure out what chords are being used. And sometimes it was, a lot of times here, a lot of the tunes do use a G chord. So a G major chord against an A minor chord. So we're in A minor and there's a G chord. And that can be a characteristic of a tune that is in the Dorian mode, but is also actually a chord that fits in the Aeolian mode. So if you're playing in A minor in modal scales, you will probably maybe have a G chord in there. So A minor and G, those were the chords I could be pretty confident in. There was usually some kind of an E chord, but if you have studied music theory in minor keys very much, you know that the E can be minor sometimes and major sometimes. So I found myself often using a 1-1-1 bar chord, just the E and the B, but not the G, which would be G sharp if it's major and G natural if it's minor. So by doing that, I knew I was probably going to have an A minor I was going to have a G major, and I was going to have some kind of an E chord. And then beyond that, I didn't know what to expect. So I asked the piano player, when you're in A minor, what chords do you usually have? And do you usually have F sharps or not? And he said, well, it totally depends on the tune. I'm like, great. That's been my history, right? With minor songs is it totally depends on the tune. There's nothing really predictable about it. So now I've been to that same session 4 times. And while it does totally depend on the tune, there are 2 things that usually happen. And I have started to be able to recognize what they are. So one thing that might happen is when I'm in A minor, the chords that I expect to use are related to the key of G major. So A minor is the Dorian mode of G major. So if I'm playing A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, those are the notes that I also expect to use when I'm playing in the key of G. So I would be playing A minor as my starting chord and my ending chord. But then I would think about other chords that are common in the key of G. So I would expect there to be an A minor. I would expect there to be a G. I would expect there to be an E minor. I would expect there to be a C. And then sometimes there would even be a D major chord. So a lot of my A minor tunes, they were using A minors, sometimes B minors, which is also one of those chords that we can use in the key of G, C's, D's, E minors, G's, and A's. So that's one way that it often happened. The other way is that a lot of the chords were the chords that you would expect to use in the key of C, which again, if you know something about music theory, the key of C major is called the relative major of A minor, and this would be the Aeolian mode. So A is the Aeolian mode that uses the same key signature as C. So I'm missing an F natural note on this dulcimer. So playing in A minor, I really have utilized the 1.5 fret quite a lot. And when the songs seem to be connected to the key of C, and I'm just going to grab my chromatic dulcimer for 2 seconds so I can show you the F chord. I think I can do this without taking the other dulcimer out of my lap. Okay, so here's an A minor chord. Same one I was playing over on the other dulcimer. That's an L-shaped A minor chord. So I've got my A minor chord. I'll even play it the direction you're used to. And then I would play a G major chord, same one we were playing before. And then a lot of times the tune will go to an F major chord next. And so this is like 1.5, 1.5, 4 diatonic frets. The notes are F, A, and C. So it's like I'm playing along in A minor, G, F, E, which is like the 5 chord of A minor. And again, sometimes major, sometimes minor. So if I use the 1-1-1 bar chord, I'm safe with that. Just the E and the B, not the G sharp or G natural. Usually there's a G natural in the tunes that I've heard, but sometimes the piano player is still going to play an E major chord against it for that stronger, like harmonic minor chord kind of voicing. So a lot of the tunes would have this A minor, G, F walk down in them. And if I hear the F chord, then I know that I'm hearing more of an Aeolian sounding tune with F naturals, like it's in the key of C. And the other major chord I'm likely to use is a C major chord somewhere along the way. So in minor keys, I tended to hear either the relative major kinds of chords alongside of it, or the key that's a whole step below. So if we extrapolate this out to a different key, let's look at the key of E minor. Oof, my middle string went way out of tune. All right, that's closer. Okay, so let's look at the key of E minor. It's another one that lays out really nicely on a diatonic dulcimer. So if I am playing an E minor, the other major chord I'm most likely to hear is D. So lots of E minor and D, E minor and D. So that's going to be true of both of the modes. As long as we're sticking with the modal kind of chord structure, we're going to get D major chords. So then I got to figure out what other chords I might expect. So one option is that I would expect the chords of the key a whole step lower, which is D. So I'm playing in E minor, but I'm finding that there are a lot of D sounds. So Ds and Gs and As. Probably the A is the least common sound, but it would still be in there in E minor. And also, then I might hear an F sharp minor, and I might hear an A major, right? A major and B minor. Those could be in there. E minor, D, lots of G, maybe an F sharp minor, maybe an A major, maybe a B minor. Again, so the B chord in the key of E, E, F, G, A, B, E, F, G, A, B. The B is the 5 chord of E minor. And so B could be major or minor. So again, using a bar chord is a good way to create a neutral 5 chord. Your ear gets to fill in the rest of the information. So that's a B and an F sharp, but no D or D sharp against it. The other thing I might expect, so it's either key of D stuff against the key of E minor, or it's the relative major of E minor, which is G major. So I might have a lot of G chords, a lot of D chords. That was kind of true in both. But then the other major chord I would expect is a C major. And again, this kind of walk down sound of playing an E minor, D, C. That sound showed up quite a bit, and that's my clue. We're Aeolian. I'm hearing this A minor, D major, C major, which means I'm also going to expect G major chords, A minor, B can be major, can be minor, and then C, D, and E minor. So there is a predictable pattern for minor songs, but it's one of two things, right? So, and there are other kinds of minor scales. And so you get into like the harmonic minor, you get into other kinds of minor scales, and it can get more complicated. But what I have found in the traditional Scottish music, which is very much the same in traditional American old time music and traditional Irish music, is that we are generally playing modal scale patterns. And so we're also using diatonic chords. We're just using them in different ways depending on the genres, the style and the location and the era in history that we're playing even. And so I wanted to kind of walk through that like minor key stuff. It feels still for me like I'm not always 100% sure where I'm going in minor keys, but I'm getting a stronger grasp of that than I started with a month ago. That's very exciting. So, how do you practice like using the diatonic chords that maybe aren't just the 1, 4, and 5? So, I I started finding my way into this actually by listening to a class that Ken Kolodner taught about harmonized scales. That for Dulcimer Crossing members, that was a Dulcimer Crossing live class that Ken Kolodner did for us last year, I believe. It is a hammer dulcimer focused class, but it is definitely useful information for any instrument player. So he talks about taking the notes of a scale and harmonizing them with different kinds of chords. So one thing you can do is play a D scale on the melody string if you're a mountain dulcimer player, or with one hand of your hammers if you are a hammer dulcimer player. Like pick a hand and play your D scale that way. So play your D scale. And then you can just add the chord that has that note as its root as you play that. So a D note goes with a D chord, that's major. An E note goes with an E chord, it's minor. An F sharp note goes with an F sharp minor chord. A G note goes with G major. An A note goes with A major. A B note goes with B minor. And that C sharp note is that weird one that's a C sharp diminished, and you probably won't use that very much. And then the D chord is D major. The Ken Kolodner class, by the way, was actually about secondary dominants, I think, or secondary chords, but he talked about the harmonized major scales in a way that was really helpful for me to conceptualize this. So that just popped into my head as I was doing this. All right, so that's your diatonic chords with the note on the melody string as the root of the chord that you're playing. But you can also take that melody string note and put against it every other possible chord. So my D note can go against a D chord, and it's going to sound really neutral sounding. That D note can also go against an E minor chord. So I'm playing like the E and the B of the E minor chord, which is actually creating an E minor 7. So I've got this E minor chord, but a D note on the melody. It can also go with an F sharp minor chord. So I'm playing the F sharp and the C sharp, and the A would be the other note. And that's actually creating a D major 7 chord by putting that F sharp minor against it. And I can play a G chord, which also contains a D note. And then I can play an A chord. And the A chord with a D in it is going to create a suspended chord. So it's an A sus4 or an A11, depending on how you think about it. Or I can create a B minor chord. And a D note is part of the B minor chord. And when I get to the C sharp diminished, again, that's the weird one, so like probably not as helpful. All right, so against my D note, I can play D or E minor or F sharp minor or G or A or B minor. And all of those chords sound good with a D in the melody. Isn't that cool? I can play my E note on the melody string, and the obvious choice for a chord that goes with an E note is the E minor. But I can also play a D against it. So I'm playing 0, open, open, 1. But I can D, F sharp, A, and E. That's going to give me a D9. That's cool. I can take this E chord and play an F sharp or F sharp minor against it. And it's creating an F sharp minor 7. And then I can play a G against it. G, B, D, and also E, and that's creating an E minor 7 or a G6. I can play an A against it, and there's an E note in an A chord, so I get a full A chord, and then I can play a B minor against it, B, D, and F sharp. With an E creates a B minor. What does that one create? E, B, D, and F sharp. I don't know the name of that one off the top of my head. You could call it a couple of different things, but it's a chord that sounds okay, right? So basically every note can sound okay with all of the 6 common diatonic chords. The 7th is weird. It may not sound good against it. Doesn't tend to get used, but 6 of these chords tend to get used over any of these melody notes. So practicing that, like here's my melody note, what chords can I play against it? So now I'm on F sharp. I can play a D chord. I can play an E minor chord. I can play an F sharp minor chord. I can play a G chord. I can play an A chord. I can play a B minor chord. That's all of my chords. Go to G, do the same thing. Try each chord with these different melody notes. But in the context of practicing it to make it musical and not just an exercise, I have found hymns or kind of airs, ballads, slow pieces to be a really great way to try this. And those are pieces where I tend to hear different chords in different contexts, right? If I'm playing, for example, You Are My Sunshine, and I change up all the chords and I put other chords in it, it's just going to sound like I'm playing the song wrong because everybody plays You Are My Sunshine with the same 3 chords, maybe 4, always in the same place. So if I start messing with putting a different chord in that song, it's going to sound funny in my brain. But hymns tend to be harmonized differently in different hymnals, and a lot of us have heard recordings of hymns that have different kinds of chords in them. And some of our like slow, pretty waltzes or airs, they tend to be harmonized in different ways depending on the arrangement or the recording that we're listening to. And so you can take a song like The Dawning of the Day. Is one of my favorites to do this with. That's just like the first line of the tune. And I can harmonize the F sharp note, which is the one you stay on for a while, with a D chord. Or I can harmonize it with an F sharp chord. Or I can harmonize it with a B minor chord. Or I can harmonize it with an A. I don't like that one as well. Or I can harmonize it with a G. And so, or an E minor. I actually like that. So that's a way that I kind of practice putting different chords against a melody line, is I just take a pretty simple melody tune that doesn't go very fast, and I try each of the 6 diatonic chords against that melody note. Now, I have heard some of the piano players here throwing in things that are not strictly diatonic, and that happens in all genres of music as well. So diatonic chords are not the end all be all, but they are the starting point for all of the all of the genres that I have explored so far. So bluegrass and old time and Irish and Scottish, they tend to lean into these diatonic chord progressions, and they just use them in different ways. So I invite you to explore that technique, that style, and to practice around in some minor keys and see what you discover with chords. So Kelly, for chords in the noter style, traditionally noter style is not a chord-based way of playing. And so you have your drones, which the pipers here also play with drones. And so you can hear strong connections between the pipes and the dulcimer and the use of drones in that way. But I kind of unconventionally, when I teach kids with the noters, because they're fingers are tender and can't always press it, or when I'm teaching somebody with some adaptive tools, using the noter to create a bar a little bit more like a dobro player traditionally does, where the noter is actually covering all of the strings, gives you a way of playing chords with a noter. And so if you were playing with someone else and they're playing the melody, you could use your noter to play chords. You're not going to be able to play chords and melody simultaneously usually in that method, but it does give you a way that you can play at least the bar chords along. And in DAD tuning, that's going to work really nicely for you. You can get all of those diatonic chords by using bar chords. So play along with that a little bit, when you're playing along with someone else, and see how it feels to try using bar chords against someone else's melody. Yeah. All right. Well, my friends, thank you for being here this morning. Happy Wednesday. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and that if you have any questions about these diatonic chords, hit me up or check out some of the lessons that exist on Dulcimer Crossing about these chords. And I will see you next week on Wednesday as well. Take care. Bye.